right, so welcome back to the third segment of our unit on Vedic ritual. Now, we've seen how important ritual was to ancient Vedic communities. I thought we could now open up the hood, so to speak, and think about how these rituals were actually supposed to work, at least within the kind of thought processes of people who were living in North India between 1000 to 500 BC. Now, basically, what we're going to be asking is, what were these people thinking? Right? What were the Vedic rituals supposed to accomplish? What was the logic, if there was any, behind how these rituals were supposed to actually work? We can imagine Vedic ritual practice as involving two different kinds of texts that we've already talked about. First, remember, we have those Samhita anthologies, right? Those four collections of sacred mantras that have an efficacious power in our world. This power, if you remember, is called Brahman, right? Then each of those four Vedas, which has a Samhita, but it also has Brahmanas. These Brahmana texts basically explain how you can use those mantras in the Samhitas in the context of a ritual, so that the user can kind of properly harness that Brahman power, the energy of the mantras. These Brahmanas are really hard to read and understand, but at their core, you can think of one basic idea as persisting. Using Vedic mantras in a ritual creates a profound connection or homology between three different spaces. One, there's the microcosm, which is the human body. Two is the mesocosm, which is the ritual space itself. And three is the macrocosm, which is the world, the heavens, the gods. The Vedic thinkers called this connection a bandhu in Sanskrit. Let's keep this Sanskrit word in mind as we're talking about how ritual thought works. Here's one example of a bandhu. There's an idea that during a ritual, there's a bandhu, or deep connection that's made between a person's eye, the ritual fire, and the god Agni, or the sun, which is also fire. These bandhus are kind of like magic, right? But the noted Vedic scholar Michael Witzel explains that there's actually an ancient logic behind this magical thought. This that can be summed up by a single phrase that he uses: similarity means identity. In other words, if two things have one feature in common, similar feature, the Vedic mantras and Vedic rituals have a power that they contain to hook these two things up together. The bandhus were this central aspect of the Vedic belief system, this hooking up. Right? People in this religious tradition, at its core, believed in the existence of these bandhus, and unless we accept the existence of these bandhus, at least in principle, just for a moment, then we won't be able to appreciate how that ritual system works. So if the idea is that a Vedic priest could fully learn about how these connections work, these bandhus, and if he could gain complete mastery over the bandhus, then he can manipulate either the microcosm, the body, or the macrocosm, the universe, by saying or doing things in the mesocosm, the ritual space itself, where those bandhus are being forged, made. The quest for the secret knowledge of the bandhus became a kind of national obsession for Vedic thinkers for hundreds of years, right? And by around 500 BC, it was the kind of impetus, the drive for the development of a fascinating new field of speculative philosophy in those texts called the Upanishads. We're going to be looking at those texts very soon in our journey, but for now, think of them as kind of like the final culmination of all of these questions about how bandhus work in the Vedic ritual, how those secret connections work. Now, how did Vedic rituals actually work in the late Vedic period? Maybe to sum it up, we can say that for Vedic communities who lived in North India from 1000 to 500 BC, Vedic rituals worked by connecting our human world of life and death to the larger cosmic world of the immortal gods through the power of Vedic speech and Vedic ritual actions, both of which had that Brahman force to create bandhus or connections. Now, how about another question then? How did these Vedic rituals impact the everyday lives of people who lived in North India in that late Vedic time period, right? Not just the priests, the specialists, the kings, but how about ordinary householders, women, children, right? Ordinary people. Of course, we can't really do justice to this question in like a YouTube video. It's very complicated and controversial. But one thing we can see is that Vedic rituals by about 500 BC were fully an integral part of cultural life in northern India. The tradition divided ritual into two different types, Shrauta and Gruhya rituals. The Shrauta rites were held in public. They were intended to have a large scale impact on the village community or the country or even the world. The Gruhya rites, the other kind, were domestic in nature and they were targeted for individual householders and their families. The name for Gruhya comes from the Sanskrit word for home, Gruha. If you know Hindi, you might know Ghar, for example. The differences between Shrauta and Gruhya rituals are both practical and theoretical. On a practical level, the Shrauta rites were performed in a public pavilion. They involved 3 fires and they required a full team of priests, sometimes even up to 17 different priests. They could take a few hours to perform, a few days, a few months even. The largest rituals, which are probably theoretical rituals, could take a year or 12 years to perform. And you needed, therefore, wealthy donors to kind of make it happen. Some examples of the Shrauta public rituals are all the Soma offerings, for example. All the Soma offerings were Shrauta rituals. Royal consecration was a Shrauta rite. There were Shrauta rites for the full moon and the new moon, or for the equinoxes and the solstices. And the most complex of the public rites was the horse sacrifice, or Ashwamedha. We'll look at that next time, actually. The Gruhya rites, the domestic rites, were usually far simpler and done in the home. They were generally concerned with events in the life of a kind of typical householder. They required only one fire, the household fire, the domestic fire. You're supposed to keep, every married Vedic man was supposed to keep a domestic fire burning in his hearth. And it needed only one family priest, or it could be yourself if you're trained in basic Vedic ritual practice. The most basic of the Gruhya rites is called the Agnihotra, or the offering to Agni, and these have to be done every day at dawn, midday, and dusk. Then there's life cycle rites like childbirth or a boy's initiation ceremony where the boy gets a sacred thread that you can see people wearing. There's the wedding, there's funerals. Right? Actually, for mainstream Hindus, all of the ones I just mentioned are usually still carried out using Vedic ritual, even now. Right? It's in these 4 contexts: birth, initiation, wedding, funerals. You still need Vedic mantras and Vedic priests. For everything else, as we're going to see, there are other newer ways of worshiping the gods, especially Shiva, Vishnu, and the goddess, that start to become more and more popular at the start of the first millennium in the post-Vedic age. Now, as you might be able to imagine, being a professional Vedic priest meant that you got hired to do all these kinds of rites by different patrons, from basic householders to village chiefs, even like a king or an emperor, right, would hire you. You're supposed to ideally know how to do all the rituals, since you should have like the entirety of the Veda memorized. But practically, right, this wouldn't always be the case. It's not possible for everyone to memorize the entire Veda. And to make things easier, different schools of Vedic training, they started to produce cheat sheets, kind of like digests for their school. These were the earliest man-made texts called smritis, or remembered texts. Remember those texts, right? The smritis provided quick references for all the methods and rules that you'd need to conduct specific public rites or domestic rites. The smritis that describe public rites are called Shrauta Sutras, and the ones that describe specific domestic rites are called the Gruhya Sutras. Like I said, the vast majority of Vedic rituals that are still performed today are Gruhya, domestic rites. And so the Gruhya Sutras actually still have a kind of importance today. A typical priest today, a Vedic priest, would memorize just those Vedic mantras that you need for your typical wedding or other handful of domestic rituals. Then they would be taught some of the Brahmana texts that explain those mantras that they've memorized. And then they would also get a Gruhya Sutra of this particular school that they go to, that they would carry around so that they can do those rites correctly. Nowadays, we only see these kinds of domestic Gruhya rites being performed, but the Shrauta rites were especially important in the formation of ancient Vedic society. In our next segment, we're going to turn to those and get a sense of how the complex public rituals worked and appreciate the kind of intricate spectacle or theater that was involved where you had like lots and lots of different priests working as a team to doing all kinds of intricate actions together in a sort of a cacophonous symphony of ritual to as they were performing these public Vedic rituals. So we'll see.